Hi everyone, welcome back to Dave's Shed. This is a wood lathe. It's a ALDI Workzone wood lathe. I call it that because that's what it's labelled as. In fact, it's known under a lot of different names from different manufacturers. As far as I can tell, it's exactly the same machine that's being sold for a number of years, but under different brand names, not only in Australia but around the world, as far as I can tell from pictures online. So, but I brought this from ALDI last year, and they're on sale again now, next week. So I thought I'd just give you my thoughts about my experience with it, and see whether you want to rush down to ALDI next Wednesday, I think it is, and buy one of these. First of all, it's on sale at ALDI for $149, I think, off the top of my head. Last time they came on in my area, it's going to vary by area, but in my area they were slow to sell. And what happens in ALDI, if they're slow to sell, then after a while they'll bring the price down even further and further to get the things out of the store. So that's what happened. So I ended up buying this, I can't remember to be honest exactly, but about $110 or something like that. So for a piece of machinery, it's not a lot of money. But of course you get what you pay for. So if you I would say if you already know how to turn, or if you're serious about getting into turning, then you don't want this lathe, and I'll explain that why. However, if like me, turning was something I was interested in getting into maybe down the track, and I only really brought this because it was cheap basically, and because I've seen it, I have had a go at it, and it is enjoyable. In fact, it's a lot of fun. So I thought, well, okay, I'll do it. I'll get into it. But I don't, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to spend. I didn't have the budget to go off and buy one. So it fitted me. The other reason it fitted me is that I just don't have space for what I call a proper lathe. This is a proper lathe. Obviously, I don't want to suggest this is a toy. That might be a dangerous attitude to have. It's not a toy. But if I can be that condescending about my own lathe, it's not what I call a proper lathe, and I'll explain what I mean by that. It is actually a proper lathe, and it will turn, and I've used it, and we'll get to that. But I just don't have the space for what I would call a proper lathe. So whereas this can just sit on a bench top, as you can see, I've just got it here on my table, which is how I use it, and when it's not being used I go and just put it on a bench, and it's light enough for me just to pick it up and do that. So if I didn't get this, then the only other kind of lathe that I could get would be something that you could use to turn pens or something like that, and nothing wrong with that. That would be fine, but it's just not what I'm into at the moment. So it's if you've got very limited space, very limited budget, or I'll come to the budget thing in a minute, because it's not as cheap as I've made it out to be. But you might not be willing to invest a lot of money into it, because it might be something you're not sure if you might want to have a go first. Or like me, you may have had a little bit of a go somewhere else, and so you just might want to get into it. But it might be something like in my case that I really don't often do very often. But having done it, it's a lot of fun. So I recommend getting into wood turning if that's of any interest in having a go. And this is a good way to have a go, because the outlay for the actual machine, as I've mentioned, it is not much. The catch with that it's cheap justification is that it's not really cheap to get into. There is the cost of the lathe, but that's not the only cost. Okay, first of all, you need to have some chisels. Okay, so I've got a set of chisels here. Now, I was warned about this before, when I was thinking about buying this thing by an experienced turner, and he pointed out to say, well, there's the cost of the lathe, but then you've got to figure in all these other costs. Okay, so that did make me pause, and I thought about it for quite a while. And one of the things that you're going to have to buy in addition to the machine are chisels, and they need to be lathe turning chisels. And here's a set here. I've still got the little plastic covers in my ones. So you're going to need a set of chisels. Now I had figured all this out. I had figured out I could go and buy some I think they're made in China chisels, which were reasonable quality. You don't want really crap ones, it's a false economy, but you want to have ones that are a reasonable quality but they're quite cheap. So I had that all lined up. The catch is, of course, when these come out on ALDI, then they're selling I don't know how many throughout the country. So then people are also going to go and do the same research as you're going to do and go and want to buy the same set of kind of beginner chisels that you want to buy. And so then they all sold out. So then I went, okay, fine, I'll get some second-hand ones. But of course, the same situation. At that point in time, everybody's buying up the second-hand chisels because they just, like me, they just want to have a go and they don't want to invest too much into it at that point. So it actually ended up sitting in my workshop for some months before I was able to find a set of chisels at a price point that I was willing to part with. That weren't too, you know, I'd been warned, don't get ones that are absolute bottom quality, you'll regret it. The other advice that you'll get from experienced wood turners is they'll say, well, as a beginner, you don't need to go and buy a set of chisels. See, here I've got a whole set of chisels. You don't need to go and buy a whole set of chisels as you're a beginner. You only need to buy 2 or 3. Well, that's great advice. But as a beginner, how am I supposed to know which 2 or 3 I should buy? But one thing I can tell you is you'll need a roughing gouge. So you'll need that. That's what this is. And you'll need a roughing gouge, which is what you use to take the raw wood or log or section of wood you've got and turn it into a rough cylinder shape. Okay, so that's the first step, and you use this tool for that. But then after that, there are all sorts of different tools that you could have. Okay, and it all depends on the kind of work you're doing and a whole bunch of other things. So as a beginner, how are you supposed to know? So in the end, although that might be wonderful advice, unless you've already got some experience, you don't know which other tools to buy. So you end up buying one of these sets anyway. So that's my experience at least. So that's what I did, and I had to in order to get one at the price point that I was willing to suffer, descended around, sitting around for months, which was fine for me because I hadn't actually really budgeted to buy it in the first place anyway, which is why I didn't have the budget for the chisels. so that's cool. That was no problem for me. I was in no hurry to get into it. Just really being opportunistic thing, just to have a go. Just like I bought the scroll saw because it was dirt cheap and I wanted to have a go. So that's great, and I'm glad I did because, as I say, it's a lot of fun. It's really good. So there is the chisels. You need to buy the chisels. Then the next thing you're going to need is you need to sharpen the chisels, and sharpening them by hand is not realistic. You're going to have to sharpen them a lot, and so you need a machine to do that. Okay. Now your garden variety bench grinder is not going to be good enough for that. This one is way too small anyway, but even if you had a decent powered one with these standard kind of wheels, that's not recommended by anyone I've talked to. These wheels, you're going to have to at least minimum change the wheels to ones that are not going to get your steel so hot, because what happens is when you sharpen your chisels on one of these wheels, it'll heat up the steel. Now the steel is hardened. I don't know if you can see that. It says HSS, which means hardened stainless steel. Now it's hardened. The way it gets hardened is it gets heated up to a certain temperature and allowed to cool slowly, and provided it never reaches that temperature range again, it will stay harder than certain other steel. So that's how it's hardened. Now if you go and then stick it on a grinder and it heats up, there's a good chance you'll heat it up back into that temperature band, and the effect of that is it loses its hardness, so then it won't stay sharp for you. So the next thing, once you've got some chisels, is then you need a decent kind of machine, and there may not be a grinder, maybe there are other options, but you're going to need some kind of other machine to sharpen that, and that could easily cost you as much as one of these cheap little lathes. So and the chisels can easily cost you a lot more than one of these cheap lathes. Again, so there's, we've tripled the price already, right? So just think about that, and then last but not least at all, throw that away. Last but not least is that you're going to have some protection. Now, goggles like these, eye protection, that's not sufficient. That's not going to be good enough to protect your eyes. But you're also going to need to have, I say also because the recommendation is you have both on, but you're going to need a full face mask, because what happens is that as it's spinning there and you're cutting bits off, you can actually have pieces of wood fly off towards your face, which you've got your attention directed straight at that piece of wood. So the face might be the first thing in the way of that flying projectile. So you're going to need to have one of these. Now, I managed to get a good deal on one of those, but that's another cost. Yeah. So it's a lot more than the lathe, and it turns out on this scale, the beginner scale, things like this. This is, as I say, maybe it could be a third or less of the total outlay. Now, if it's like me, I was in absolutely no hurry at all, and I hadn't budgeted for it. I went and bought this because I got it even cheaper than the normal ALDI price. So that was good, and I just took my time until I did have enough money to go and buy the next piece and the next piece. So that took many months. Actually, I had it sitting around for many months before I actually even used it at all, because I just didn't have the equipment to be able to use it. So that's fine if you're in a similar situation, or you don't want to go out. A proper lathe can be thousands of dollars. So before you make that investment, that may be something you can do. Or like me, I just don't have a space for now. I'm calling them a proper lathe. So let me explain what I mean by that, because this is obviously a proper lathe. You can turn things with it. And it's certainly no toy. One of the key things is that you'll observe here is that this is made up of tubular steel frame. Okay, now what I call a proper lathe has a cast iron base, and usually it's one that actually is floor standing, but it could be even the smaller, called midi lathes, bench mounted. They will have a cast iron base, and it's that mass holding the whole thing down, which is really important. When you've got a piece of wood inside here spinning, it's got that rotational momentum, and what you don't want is the machine to be moving around, which will easily happen as soon as you get a certain amount of spinning mass occurring as in your work area. So the lack of having that mass down here in the machine to hold it down to is a key difference. But it's that mass that's a problem for someone like me, who's just got a very small workshop, and I just don't have the room for a lathe like that. I don't have the budget for it either, by the way. But I just even if I did, I just actually don't have anywhere to put it. So that's another consideration. This is not something I would want to pick up very often, but I can pick it up, and you could mount it onto something that even folded it up, perhaps when it was out, not being used, or something like that. You could actually just. I have actually seen another YouTuber with this, so that it actually folds up against the wall. So it uses minimal space in his workshop while it's being used. Well, you can't do that with a proper lathe. It's just not going to be a realistic option. So I've got this back to front to me so that you can see it. So it feels a bit awkward for me. However, you've got the motor in here, and it doesn't have a chuck, by the way. So it doesn't have a chuck. Now, most people, what they're going to do is they're going to go and buy a chuck. So there's another thing to buy, a chuck. Right? Now, in my case, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to keep spending money on the machine. Everyone's going to have a different opinion about this, but I think it's just not worth it. I think once I start getting into this in a bit more kind of serious fashion, I'll then go and buy a proper lathe, right? Okay, but I guess you could buy a chuck and you could fit into this, but there's not. It's not. There's various features that this doesn't have. It does have. You are able to change the speed, but to do that, you've got to open up this box here and change some belts on the side, and I'll show you that if you're interested. Okay, you have a, as I mentioned, you've got variable speed by being able to change the belt, which is inside here. Unfortunately, what you have to do is you have to undo this bolt to be able to open this door to get to the belts, and then you can get to these belts. You can see, hopefully you can see, there's different pulleys in here, and you can change the pulleys. So you know, that takes a bit of fluffing around, but you can do that to get a different speed ratio. And on the door, it shows you what pulley arrangement you should have for a certain speed. Now the catch is that here is a switch, and it will not allow it won't turn that motor on unless this pin is inserted back in here, which means that it has to be fully done up, not just kind of hanging closed loose there. So that further adds to the time it takes to change speeds. Now I do know someone who better engineering skills than me has changed this out and turned it into a kind of a pin that he can pull in and out to get that thing to close each time, but to make it faster. So that would be a really good idea. So that's a bit slow, whereas if you spent actually a lot more money, but if you spent that money, you'd be able to get one that had a knob here, a variable speed controller, in other words, so you could just turn a knob and change the speed, and that becomes important. So when you're for example, when you're starting to work on a piece, it might be going at a slower speed, and then it might be going at a faster speed for different operations and so on. But I'm not here to tell you about how to turn, because I don't know myself, I'm just learning anyway. But you'll discover that variables, being able to change the speed is something that you're going to do on every project, and so, more or less. And so having to change the belts and so on is a drawback. But you know, it works, you can do that. And it actually comes in two pieces. So I've got this piece here. I've got the tail stock, and it has, I'm not sure if you can see over there, this little clamp here. It's not the kind of most user-friendly thing, but you can move this tail stock around and clamp it into position. And then you've got this guide here, hopefully you can see that as well, for your tool. So I'm standing behind it, so this is the view you would have if you were using the machine. So just grab a tool again for a second. So your tool would be resting on this guide, and your workpiece would be in between these two parts. So more about that perhaps in another video. Well, there's lots of videos on YouTube about all of that stuff. So it comes in two pieces, apart from these parts also. You need to assemble those and put those on, and then it also comes in this section over here. Now I was tempted to just leave this piece off, because as I say, space is a problem for me, and I don't, because I'm just going to use this I'm not going to turn bowls, or if I do it'll be something really small. I'm just going to use this to turn small bits of spindles, and I don't often do that. So I may, for a lot of that work, I don't actually need that much space in here. So I was tempted to leave that part off, but then I realised, well, that adds a little bit more to the mass, so and to the rigidity to some extent. So I bolted that on and kept that on. So that's the way it is. The other thing you could do is there are holes in here, and this is designed to be bolted down to something. which would make it mean that I couldn't then lift it around very easily to put it away. So I haven't really been able to do that, or I haven't done it. But yeah, there are bolts here, and this is designed to be bolted down to something with a bit more mass, and that would be definitely a recommendation. What I do is I just put it on my assembly table here, and I just clamp it down to the assembly table so that it won't move around. But yeah, the more mass that you could put onto this, the better you'll find it is. If you're just turning something that's quite small in diameter, though, you don't get that much rotational momentum. So it works. You know, it may not be ideal, but it works. It works fine for small spindle kind of things. So I've got this, and I had a little bit of a practice on some softwoods first, and then did a little bit on some hardwoods. I made a little project, and I'll show you that in another video. And yeah, as I say, it is a lot of fun. It is good fun. So I would recommend it with those caveats that I mentioned. So if you know you want to get into woodworking, don't bother with this. Go and get a better lathe would be my recommendation. Sorry, wood turning. What did I say? If you know you want to get into wood turning, you probably want something better. If it's something that you plan to do quite a bit of, or if you've done it before, then I probably don't even need to tell you. You probably want something better. However, if you don't meet those criteria, and/or you, like me, you've got limited space, but you want something that's big enough to turn more than just something tiny, then yeah, this fits that particular niche. So in my case, I couldn't, as I say, I couldn't really have any other kind of lathe, which means I wouldn't have a lathe at all. So unless I got into turning pens or something, and that, I might do that one day, but I'm not interested in that at the moment. So yeah, it suits me. So if you're in my situation, then go out and do it. No, I don't turn a lot. It's something that I'll gradually learn. The other advice I've been given consistently is you should go to a club or men's shed or something like that, where they have people that experience wood turners, and get some help, get some instruction. I haven't done that. I should do that. I have actually had some before I bought this. I did actually get a little bit of instruction, hands-on, you know, go at it. And so yeah, and I can see that if you get some good instruction, it would make the world of difference. But even without that, it's good. You know, there's a lot of YouTube videos and so on, which isn't the same thing, but you know, you can get the concepts and give it a go, and it's actually, yeah, it is a lot of fun. You've got wood chips flying everywhere, but it's not unhealthy because it's not the fine dust. So as long as you've got the proper personal protection shield, face shield, to protect yourself, then that's good. You don't, but it's not. I come out and do it outside here anyway. Plus, you're going to have, you know, shavings everywhere, so you need to think about that, because there's going to be some cleanup involved there. But if we were always worried about cleanup, we'd never do any woodwork, would we? So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's good. You can turn some really interesting things. There's quite a bit of skill involved to learn. So after you've given it a go, you'll realise if you want to get things symmetrical in someone, that's not as easy. So you see all these YouTube videos and they make it look like a piece of cake, but their experience, yeah. So, but that's all part of the challenge. That's all good, and I'm sure if you got some proper instruction, they'd be able to help you to achieve all those things. So I'll probably do that at some point. As I say, I'll produce another video and show you a little turn little spindle thing I turned of another video that's of interest. But I just wanted to give you my thoughts on this. I would recommend it. A lot of people wouldn't recommend it, but I think it fits a niche. I think it just depends where you're coming from and where you're going. So that's my 2 cents worth. So thanks for watching. You take care, and I'll see you in the next video.